Good afternoon. We will call the May 25th, 2021 special strategic work session to order. This is not a rerun from yesterday, I mean. This is a new meeting. So we've got quite a few items to get through today. Are there any citizens in the office, good heavens, I need more sleep. Are there any citizens in the audience that would like to speak to any item not on the agenda? Seeing none. Item 3.1.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I'd like to make a few comments before we get started, and then I will introduce Angela Christ, who will come and present the strategic planning process. The purpose of the meeting this afternoon is twofold. First, it is to establish a comfort level that you all have with the strategic planning process that you have agreed to participate in. This is a very timely, and I'm personally excited about it. Although I won't necessarily be here to the end of it, but I think it's a very good move, and I think I've shared that with all of you that I think it's a very good thing. That's why it's number one. So we want to make sure that the Florida Institute of Government team is clear on what your expectations are. The second part, that is 3.2 through 3.7, is really designed to help the staff get some insight from you around items that potentially will influence the 22 budget. And typically during the strategic planning meeting that we would typically have, council will often express, kind of what levels of emphasis that they would like to see. And since some of these topics are not new to you, you know that depending on your perspective, it will definitely influence how we put our budget together. So that's really the idea. Items 3.2 and 3.7, we'll move through those just as quickly as you will let us move through them. Okay. So the intent is not necessarily to spend 3 hours here, but we did want to have enough time, especially we wanted to allow time for the very first item to make sure that we clearly accomplish our goal there. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Angela Christ. She is someone that I have known for quite a while, as well as some of the members of her team. And so we certainly welcome her, and we're glad that she is leading the charge.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So again, Angela Christ. I am the director of the Florida Institute of Government at the University of South Florida. We are delighted to be working with you on this wonderful project. Just quick, I'm assuming, do they have the PowerPoint? Yes. Okay, thanks. So just wanted to very quickly talk a little bit about the School of Public Affairs and the Florida Institute of Government and who our project team is. So first of all, many of you may know Dr. Don Daly. He is an associate professor in the School of Public Affairs. He graduated with his PhD from Indiana University, and his specialty obviously is local government, but also human resources, employee engagement, organizational development. And then Dr. Stephen Neely, he graduated with his PhD from NC State, and his specialty, I call him our statistician. He is a quants guy, right? So he is all about surveys and statistical analysis, also has great experience in doing research on community resident surveys, and so he's part of our team. Obviously myself, I have my MPA as well, done a lot of strategic planning, working with local government. My very first job was in local government, actually. So anyway, pleasure to be here. And then Robin Odegaard, she is part of my team, and she's actually does a lot of project management, as well as a research administrator within the university. So she keeps us on our toes and makes sure we're following deliverables.
So let me ask you, Ms. Christ, when are we going to see these different individuals? Where will they enter the process?
And when I walk through the phases of the project, I'll be happy to talk about who's doing what. Unfortunately or fortunately for the professors, their summer has already started. The semester is over, and so they are not in town. Could have done virtually, but couldn't be here today. So, but they will be involved through the process throughout the summer and ongoing. So, and I'll talk about each phase, who does what. Okay, so today we're going to do, here's our agenda. We're going to have an individual activity that the council and mayor will participate in. We'll talk a little bit about the milestones in the history of the city, talk about the overview and approach of what we're doing and why we're doing it, the various phases, and again, who from our team will be a part of those phases. We will have a group activity around beginning to develop the vision. We'll talk a little bit about next steps, some of the challenges that we foresee, hopefully some solutions that we can bring to those, and then obviously questions and ideas that you may have. I will say if you have questions or ideas throughout, please stop. That's what we're here for. Okay, so we are going to start off right away. You should have a set of Post-it notes in front of you. Over on this table to my right, there is a timeline that starts in 1915, and it goes into 2021. And so individually, does everyone have a pen or need a pen? We'll get you a pen. Okay, so these are the questions that you need to do on your own, and you're going to answer. And please don't get up yet, because for making sure we're recording, I'm going to give you a few minutes. Just write one thing per sticky note. So what are those people and events that could have been in the city, could have been around the city, or even at the world that made a difference in the history of Clearwater? From 1915 until today.
We don't need to have the correct year.
No, just kind of,
Kind of a sequence
yes,
of-
sequence. Doesn't have to be the exact year. It's really, what do you think has impacted the city to make it to where it is today? What are those people, events? Could have been exactly within the city. And please only write one per sticky note. So if you have 4, you're going to do 4 sticky notes. And you'll have a few minutes to do this. just make sure if you have a lot of notes that you kind of have like the time frame, like if you think it's like 1950s or 1960s, that would be helpful.
Okay.
What year was Atrium, Pam?
That we bought it,
Yeah, for 2 weeks.
93.
3.
I don't know dates. Okay.
All right, is everybody about done, or you need another minute? Okay, I'll give you one more minute.
You can write on your post-it notes, knucklehead.
I got them in sequence, but I don't know.
Under my computer.
You got the big one.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to go first? And what's going to happen, so you don't have to get up, if you wrote, Rosemarie is happy to get them from you, but you need to read them from the dais, please.
All right, they're not chronological.
That's okay.
The Senior Center, 2006, I believe. Chamber merger with the Beach Chamber, 2019. Crest Lake Park, 2021. Ruth Eckerd Hall, 1982. Jack Russell, 1954.
53, 54, something like that.
We'll call it 1954.
Just put the 50s. That's close enough.
Rolling Stones, mid-70s.
No,
That was
mid
late-
60s.
Was it 60s?
Mid to late 60s.
I wasn't born yet. Long Center,
Very good.
Capitol Theater, 2009. 2000 referendum. CMA Downtown, 2012. U.S. Steel Sand Key, 1960s. Annexation of Countryside. That was early 70s, Pam?
I want to say 73, somewhere
That
around.
sounds right to me.
It was when Meyer, it was when Spearhunt was.
Beach Walk, 2004. Atrium Building, 1993. Beach by Design, 1999. Loss of USF campus, I believe, was 72.
And then there was another shot in the 90s, I believe.
And Scientology, 1975.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
He got a whole lot more than I, but he did.
That's
Like
fine.
individual things, 'cause mine was more general in description. I think one of the things that was a milestone for us and starter thing was, bridge construction in the 20s and 30s that allowed us access out to the beach. I think that's a major thing. Construction of Sunshine Mall, which started the retail exodus from downtown Clearwater. That was in the 60s.
Okay, very good.
And my other one is the ability to do worldwide marketing and travel, which created Clearwater as the destination it is today.
And when was,
That, really, the worldwide marketing and everything, really, I don't think kicked in till probably the late 80s, early 90s, and continued into the 2000s.
can you please make sure that you have the start date on that?
Sure.
Thanks. All right, great, thank you. Yes, hi,
Mine have a much narrower scope,
that's okay.
and they were introduced by the mayor. 1975, Scientology is sneaking into town. 1978, FBI raiding Scientology's headquarters and sending the top leaders to prison. 1982, we held televised hearings on Scientology from our council chambers throughout the city. 1995, Lisa McPherson died while being held at the Fort Harrison Hotel. And in 99 and 2000, there was a criminal trial about that. And 3 years ago, the newspaper articles that showed that Scientology bought up most of the remaining property downtown. But then, 2021, the district is starting to work and bringing some life back downtown.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I know, again, I did a brief look last night and left all my notes on my desk.
That's okay.
So this is like from memory. All right, so I remember that it's, Clearwater was founded or had indigenous people, the Tokabagna, I don't know how to pronounce them, and I certainly don't know the year. There was a federal initiative that gave 160 acres to men who came to Clearwater who agreed to bear arms and plant crops. So that's how some of the people that we have names that are famous in Clearwater started with some of those land acquisitions. Fort Harrison was part of some battle with a Seminole battle or something, we don't know. We certainly had segregation in Clearwater for quite a long time. Clearwater was engaged in World War II efforts, and they had training of troops along Fort Harrison, and I found it interesting that they practiced bombing on Sand Key, on that property out there. I have the Capitol Theater as like the 1910s, is it coming? The bridge to the beach, the drawbridge, was a big impetus for economic development and tourism. I thought that was like the 30s, but I'm not sure. Church of Scientology, the Memorial Causeway Bridge being constructed. A beach walk, Jazz Fest, Imagine Clearwater, Crest Lake Park, the district, those kinds of things.
Thank you very much. Last but not least.
I didn't follow directions very well, but I
That's-
just wanted to, I started way back with the Tobago Indians as well. In the 1600s, they came and settled in this area, and some of their burial mounds, the shell in that we used to pave Cleveland Street when Cleveland Street was first established. Fort Harrison, 1860, was actually a fort that was built on the water here as a respite for the U.S. Army soldiers that came in. And it only lasted about 6 months. It was closed, but the people that came through there loved Clearwater, and they came back and settled. So there were a lot of early settlers in Clearwater that went to Fort Harrison. Grover Cleveland, he was president who Cleveland Street was named for, after he was known for like business building. And 1915, Clearwater was chartered in Pinellas County. It was chartered earlier, previously in the 1800s, but under Hillsborough County. And so Island Estates was developed in about 1958. Star Spectaculars were very important. We talked about that before with me. There was the city and a radio station really started having music concerts in Clearwater when Clearwater was very small, but it included the Rolling Stones and the Beach. You know, almost every group that came to big cities came to little tiny Clearwater, and I think started our music history there. One of the biggest things that I thought was that really helped our downtown was moving Highway 60 from Cleveland Street to Court Street. That happened, I think, in the 90s, didn't it? into the 1990 something?
No, it was 2003 when we built the
Was
bridge.
it when the
so-
Early
Bridge,
2000s? And then I had a few that the mayor had, 2020, the chamber merger, Capitol Theater, 2009, Beach Walk, 2004. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Well, I really appreciate you guys participating. I'm sure that when you saw the PowerPoint, you were like, why are we doing this, right? And so we think it's really critical. It's always good to remember where you came from, right? And so you'll be able to see, we will take this and we'll actually make it look a lot better in a graphic design document for you. But the whole idea is that you'll be able to see where there are some gaps, where you may not know that there's history, but there is history. And that's really what helped develop Clearwater to where it is today. And so what we want to do throughout this process is make sure that we respect that, but we also know that now we're moving forward. And so the history is there, we have to recognize it, we have to respect it, and that's what made Clearwater where it is today. And so I appreciate you participating. It was very interesting to hear different perspectives in what was important to each of you in the history of the city. So I appreciate that, and we'll have a beautiful document for you that we'll be using in the next part of the process, all right? All right, thank you guys. Okay, so I do want to go on to a little bit about our project overview and approach. I'm going to go ahead and put all of these up here, and I'm just going to talk really about them. So one of the things that I want to share with you about the approach that we are using, we use a very participatory planning model for strategic planning, and there's reasons for that. We use a phased approach. And we do this, we know that it does take a little bit longer, right? Some people say, oh, well, you can do strategic planning in one day. Well, not really. And so you can do a workshop in one day. But the reason why we use the process that we use is that it allows input from all key stakeholders, right? So that includes you as the mayor and council. That includes residents. That includes the employees. That includes businesses. So we really try to use all of those results, and I'm going to talk about how we gather all that information, but we really try to collect data, right, that then comes back to you, and then we take that data and we begin to develop that collective vision, mission, goals, objectives, action items. And so, again, we want to make sure that what we collect is sound, the best that it can be, as well as gives everyone an opportunity for input. So I will say our process is also very adaptive. We try to be as adaptive as possible. Obviously, it doesn't always work. You may have different things that you're doing within your city, and we'll talk about that in a second, where we're partnering. But again, I just want to make sure that you know and that the citizens know that there will be opportunities for them to participate as well as the employees. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the phases of the project. And so phase one of the project really is around a lot of items, very heavy lift, a lot of stuff to be done in a short period of time, but we are working through it. And so obviously first was a kickoff and work plan refinement, and we had that meeting with our entire team, as well as the city manager and his leadership team. We have been working with Joelle in terms of communications outreach. As many of you know, I've spoken with all of you. We have started our stakeholder interviews. And again, working with the city manager's office to continue to identify kind of the next set of stakeholders that will be interviewed. We will be conducting a resident feedback survey. We've also been working with Joelle on this, and so I know that you're aware that you conduct an NRC survey, the National Research Center survey, And so we have been working to make sure that we're collaborating between what NRC is doing and what we want to do. And so we hopefully in the next week or two will be back to the city manager and his team with our recommendations to make sure that we are not overburdening citizens, but that we are providing a means for them to get our resident feedback survey as well as the NRC survey. And so-
Angela, can I interrupt you for 1
Sure.
second? First of all, I appreciate that you've been working with staff and with the city manager. We do have a unique situation. Have you ever been in the middle of the process in a strategic plan where there has been a change at the city manager level? And how do you deal with that?
Sure, absolutely. So we haven't done it with the city manager. We have done it with commission, council, and or mayor. And so I think the big challenge that we had and how we resolved it was we met one-on-one with those individuals and really brought them up to speed in terms of not just the final document, but the actual plan, right? And so it's really important that whether there's a new city manager, new commissioners, new mayor, that they understand that there was a process, and again, that it was a participatory process, and making sure that they have gone through the entire data report at the end of this. There will be a community report that's really more of a communications piece, but there will also be an internal data report that has everything in there, the results from the surveys, and so it's one-on-one meetings and basically an orientation, whether it's the city manager and or mayors or elected officials.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of 1.4, the resident feedback survey, that is Dr. Neely. That is his specialty. Like I said, we've already had several calls. I'm here today with you all doing kind of the kickoff and the expectations. And again, Community Focus Group 1, we will be having, here's another opportunity for residents to get involved. So in addition to the resident feedback survey, we will be holding a focus group. And that will be approximately 3 hours. And I know that we're working on dates again with staff, but it will be an opportunity, and that will be Dr. Daly and myself and Robin Odegaard from my staff. We'll do an employee survey. We will obviously be working with HR, and that is all Dr. Daly, as well as the employee focus group. And again, we'll be working with staff to identify who we would like at the focus group, right? We want all different levels of employees. So we want those employees that are in the field. We want those employees that are managers. But we really want to get a good grasp and understanding from across the board. And then we'll come back and say, here is all the information we have gathered at this point, and here's where we are. So that's really phase 1. Okay, phase 2. This is where I like to say where, the rubber meets the road. This is it. This is where we have to bring it all together. And this is where it's a heavy lift, I'm going to be quite honest, for all of you. You guys are really going to have to participate. City manager and his team will have to participate. And so we will conduct a second focus group for the community. Again, another opportunity for them. And then what ends up happening is we begin to take all of that information and internally meet with the city manager and your set team, and to begin to you'll see some strategic themes that will begin to surface from all of that data. And then we will prepare for Leadership Forum 1. And Leadership Forum 1 is for you. You will work. It is 4 hours. We will be off-site somewhere that allows for breakouts and a lot of meaningful discussion. They obviously are open to the public, but we do need to that's where you need to come prepared to roll up your sleeves. And then following that, again, we'll take all that information that you have provided us, and we'll begin to really identify those kind of goals and objectives that come out of that. And there will be some operational issues that we'll need to make sure are in there as well, and that's where the city manager and the set team come together. We'll come back to you for Leadership Forum 2. Again, another 3 hours. This one will focus a lot on kind of finalizing what we started, but also prioritizing. And so it will be an opportunity for all of you to begin to, we'll do some activities around prioritization of those goals. And then the intent is that we may need to meet with staff one more time. And then we will have really a draft report. And the reason I say that is because there's two types of reports. One, as I mentioned, is kind of that internal data, and that will be basically an Excel spreadsheet, which is very sophisticated. That is more of a dashboard. And then the final report submission, we make sure that it is ADA compliant. And that does take a little while, again, working with communications. So those are our two phases. I am going to talk a little bit about the timeline towards the end, and I will talk to you about that. But are there any questions as of right now for the phases 1 and 2 before we go on to the next part?
Questions?
Okay.
Let me, I
Sure.
have one.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you go out and do focus groups with the community and when you have other larger venues, having gone through this before, sometimes you get energized groups that have a specific agenda.
Yes.
How do you make certain that we're really getting the full array of opinions throughout the city and the process doesn't get hijacked?
Absolutely. So a couple of ways. So first of all, again, going back to the survey, that is one of the reasons why we are trying to work with Joelle on the NRC survey, because that is statistically sound, and we want to verify what information we're getting from our resident feedback survey. So that's the first. The second is when we do the community focus groups, we work with the city to determine the best location and time. And I know that sounds like a simple answer, but it's really not. And I tell you why. Because sometimes we have to do them on Saturday, because there are people that work. And so we have to meet the needs of the community in order to make sure we're getting the right people. Because as we know, at 6 o'clock during the week, you're not going to get a lot of families. You're not going to get those who can come to a community focus group because they have obligations. And so that's how we've done it in the past. We've worked with leadership of the city or town to determine, we've done some at community centers, we've done some in the lower socioeconomic areas of the cities or towns. We also know that if there's neighborhood groups, a lot of times that there is one location where you may hit 3 or 4 neighborhood associations. And so it's really a strategic on our part to work with the city to determine the location and timing to make sure that there is an opportunity for everyone. So between the survey and that is how we do it. And obviously communications with the website, making sure everything's posted, everyone is aware of what's going on throughout the whole process. So communication is also the big key. Anything else?
No.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so I'm going to actually break you into 2 groups. And we know that you will not be recorded for your discussion, but I will have you come back to the dais to report out. That way you are recorded for the meeting. So I know this sounds silly, but it's a lot of fun. So imagine it's the year 2031, and you're writing a guest column about the city's accomplishments over the past 10 years. About what it's like to live here now. What would you write? And there'll be a group of 2 and a group of 3. Okay. So, let's have Councilman Hamilton, Councilman Beckman, and the mayor. And then Albritton and Bunker together. All right?
Okay.
Some of you here, some of you here. You ready? Let's go.
Like we're sitting at that table, those tables in here?
Yes, you're gonna have discussion at these 2
Okay.
tables and then come back, because you're gonna have to be able to talk.
Okay.
You have to write the column. It's the Tampa Bay Times. And you're talking about, you're writing a guest column, 2031, looking back.
All righty.
What has the city accomplished?
Going out that way.
That's fine.
I feel like I'm in 8th grade.
You will need a scribe. Okay. So, you will need one person who is the writer, and you will need one person who is the publisher.
Not doing what?
It doesn't go with affordable.
Excellent.
I mean, we need to find ways to be efficient.
And do what? Lemonade. Are the microphones off? Is the microphone on? So were you still excellent.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, if you could take what you've written and come back up to your seats, that would be fantastic. It's okay if it's not on the Post-it, as long as you wrote it on paper.
It's a shorter deadline than I am working in
But I do need that when we're done.
I have to go copy it on.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
You want to be the translator?
When he's done, we'll let him read, and then that way we can.
Oh, boy.
Bring it up there.
Yes, you're gonna have to present. When he's done. Yeah, thanks.
Richard's out on the big board?
Yeah, I got the title written down. That was it.
Luckily, we had a transcriptionist that could write really quick.
You wouldn't be able to read it, though.
All right, well, thank you so much for participating. So who would like to go first?
Let's have Councilmember Beckman go first.
All right.
Right.
Okay. So tell us, what does your column say?
Well, we did kind of bullet points, and in the 10 years that we're all going to be in charge, 2021 to 2031, imagine Clearwater has created an energy in downtown and Clearwater that has not been seen in generations, or I would argue ever. US 19 plan is booming. We have transit-oriented focus there with businesses that are there. We have mixed use, and it's fulfilling its goals there at US 19. We've established a framework to address sea level rise and mitigation, mostly because the world has not taken enough action to reduce it quick enough in 10 years. But we have established but we have signed on to renewable energy goals, and actually has and we actually have a bunch of solar in 10 years, and we've got savings of millions of dollars, which we're going to see over here on this side with like a clean energy fund or a green energy fund. We have a renaissance in our neighborhoods, and we are reinvesting in our neighborhoods, and we are celebrating the uniqueness of those neighborhoods. In a variety of ways. North Greenwood CRA is in full swing, and it is working to reduce poverty and empower people. We have improved the balance of the tax base ratio between residential and businesses. We have increased non-tourism related tax base, which is kind of the same thing, so we're attracting different businesses that will demand higher jobs, or higher pay, it will be higher paying jobs, more skills-based jobs. And we need to work to get our employees, our residents, skilled enough to take those jobs. We are partnering with the school system with a particular focus on early education, pre-K and reading, because statistics show that if kids aren't reading by grade level at second grade, it's a big struggle to overcome. We have reduced our carbon emissions as a city, and we may have, this is a little ambitious, but I put it in there because I was writing. We've got clean energy initiatives and incentives for residents and businesses to put solar on and save money and reduce pollution and create jobs. And how are we doing that? Where are we getting those incentives? With our green energy fund that we created when we started doing energy efficiencies. We also have, we're collaborating, we've improved our collaboration with surrounding municipalities in the county to better achieve countywide goals. And we're creating more housing in our incorporated Clearwater, a variety of housing, mixed, missing middle housing, and we have reduced homelessness in the city. So that's our ambitious, that's what we've done. You put us in charge.
Round of applause for that group. Round of applause.
I knew Mayor Beckman would
Right,
come
no.
through.
Okay, and, yes.
Are you kidding me? I gotta follow that? I didn't even get the title written down.
That's okay. I believe.
We had three, you only had two,
Nicole,
so
right?
we had an advantage.
Yeah, Nicole will
Oh,
write
man.
it for you.
I'm embarrassed. Okay. So this is an article. Looking back 10 years from 2031 in Clearwater, Florida. The opening of Imagine Clearwater in 2023 was key to revitalizing downtown Clearwater, which languished in vibrancy for over 50 years. Because of the success of the park, Osceola Avenue became as busy as Cleveland Street. This accomplished the goal of bringing more people downtown to live, work, shop, eat, and play. The addition of the amphitheater was instrumental in becoming Florida's ultimate waterfront venue, attracting performance groups worldwide, keeping Clearwater's musical history alive. The Greenwood CRA also turned North Greenwood community into a vibrant area.
Given a couple more minutes, we would have gotten the rest.
Yeah.
Yay! Bravo, that was great. Round of applause. Okay, so Councilman Albritton, if you wouldn't mind, Nicole will take it and write it on there for you.
Thank you.
Yes, that'd be great. So I really appreciate you guys participating. And there is always a method to our madness as to why we do it. And so you will see that you're beginning to develop your vision, right, for the city. There will be some crossover. There will be some outliers. But remember, the residents are also going to have that opportunity later in the process. And they will do a very similar activity. And so it'll be very interesting to see if where you've started and where we end up is in line with where they are, as well as the employees. So I really appreciate your participation today. But today was the beginning, right? Today was the beginning of that. So let's just talk really quickly. Oops. Can you put it back up for them? Sorry. I just want to make sure, because this is the timeline, so I just want to make sure that you're able to see it. I don't know if you can see it on your laptop versus that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
It's
I'm
now
sorry.
up on the screen.
I wasn't sure. Okay.
No problem.
So, so as I mentioned regarding our approach, that it does take a bit longer, obviously, because we include so many opportunities. So this is where we are at this point. Obviously, I'm here today, so I'm starting at 1.4. Again, we are working with around the resident feedback survey. So our intent is that sometime within that time frame, June 2nd to 23rd, once we have some more information from NRC, that we are able to launch that. We are looking at July 13th or 14th for the first community focus group. And again, the employee survey and the employee focus group, those can be paralleled and going on at the same time as 1.6. And so we anticipate the employee survey going out sometime in July. We may extend it a little bit. We know a lot of people take vacations in July, and so that's our intent. We'll see how our response rate is and if we need to extend it, but those are some, we are aware that it is the summer. Again, an employee focus group, the reason why we chose that week is we felt like kids were almost back in school, people would be here, and so to do the employee focus group, we want to make sure that we're able to get as many people as we can. We have October 18th as phase 1 report back to you for that meeting. And then this is where it gets, these are the weeks. Again, I do not believe the calendar has been set yet. I believe they are working on that. And so Community Focus Group 2 would be November 9th. Executive Leadership Meeting, which is, I'm sorry, I should say set Executive Leadership Meeting for 2.1A, will be December 1st or 2nd. And then the week of January 10th will be Leadership Forum 1 for you. And then Leadership Forum 2 will be the week of February 7th. We did put some time in there if we need to meet with the set executive leadership team, as I mentioned before. And then again, the strategic planning process, the draft report, not the pretty one that's ADA compliant, but the actual report that has the goals, objectives, action items, we put as in March. Again, once we have that schedule, we will make sure that it is your meeting in March. So I think it does take about 30 to 60 days after your approval to do the final, like the ADA compliant, because it has to be sent off and there's a lot of graphics in it. And So if we can get it back sooner, we will, but that's why we provided between 2.4 and 2.5. There is a little extra time built in mainly for that. So are there questions on the timeline?
Any questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Beckman.
So the resident feedback survey is going to start soon, June 2nd through June 23rd. So what is your strategy for who you're contacting and how?
Yeah, so that's what I said, those are anticipated. It may not launch till like June 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but we need some more information from NRC. And then we also need to work with Joelle. So historically, we have disseminated it. Sometimes we've put it in utility bills, a link. Sometimes we always put it on the website. Sometimes cities have a list of email addresses that it goes out to all of those individuals. Flyers in rec centers. Any way that we can communicate out, that's what we do. But again, we don't want, excuse me, we don't want to bombard them if NRC is going out. That's a select group. And so that's what we're trying to figure out timing-wise. But that's how. So it'll be disseminated every single communication vehicle you have.
Okay. Thanks. And then the staff it's all staff will be surveyed?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
All staff. All employees will receive it. Whether they choose to do it, that's another story, but they will have the opportunity to do it.
And the staff is anonymous responses?
Yes, it is. Yep. So is the resident survey. Yes, absolutely. All right.
Anyone else? All right.
And so just a couple of quick things. So again, obviously, it's a very aggressive timeline. We have a lot of heavy lifting to do, but we're happy to do it and happy to be here. Just some things for you to remember. Some of the challenges that we will see will be being able to integrate all this input we receive from everything and boiling it down and bringing it to you for you to then take this and move forward. That's always one of our biggest challenges. Making sure that we are also integrating employee input. Again, getting that to you in a way that you can understand it. And then always being transparent, obviously, with everyone in the process and being as responsive as we can. So that's really how we try to overcome some of those challenges. So, questions, ideas? That is it for me today. I appreciate your time and your engagement. And I really look forward to working with you guys. And I know Dr. Neely and Dr. Daly wish they could be here today, but they will be here throughout the process. So.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Christ.
Yes.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time and look forward to the next steps.
Sounds great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. 3.2.
Mayor, Council, since Angela did really stick to almost an hour, which we appreciate. So now we're going to start working through the remaining items. Jay Ravens is going to give us the long-term financial forecast for general fund and major utility funds. You know, this is a tool that Jay has nurtured and nursed along, a tool that we have integrated into our budgeting, and we have found it to really help us in making sure that from a financial management perspective that we stay within the lines. So, Jay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Jay Ravens, Finance Director. I'd like to briefly review a 10-year financial forecast for the general fund, as well as 6-year forecasts for the major utility funds. The general fund forecast incorporates a few major projects or initiatives impacting the general fund in the future, with the descriptions highlighted in blue on the spreadsheet. These include an estimate of an additional subsidy to the Phillies per the terms of the original proposed agreement that is currently in negotiations. Estimated Imagine Clearwater net operating costs and debt service costs for the park and the amphitheater, and implementation of a $15 minimum wage for city employees as proposed by staff. The general fund forecast reflects a significant improvement in forecasted reserves as of September 30th, 2021 versus the previous forecast, as revenues through the pandemic proved to be more resilient than forecasted, in addition to cost savings across virtually all departments. We are still including some residual impacts of the pandemic by forecasting a 0% increase in property taxes for fiscal 2022, anticipating possible decreases in commercial property valuations as of the January 1st, 2021 property valuation date. This 0% increase is followed by conservative 1% increases in each of the following 2 years, then increasing incrementally to a 3.5% level over the following 4-year period. We feel this is a conservative and cautious forecast and are hopeful that actual results will exceed the forecast. I'm happy to review as much of the detail of the forecast as you would like, but from a big picture perspective, the forecast brought forward to Council last year at the strategic planning meeting indicated the need for a 0.96 mil increase in fiscal 2025. The significant improvement in operating results versus the admittedly conservative forecast that we brought to you at the height of the pandemic, partially offset by the proposed cost of implementing a $15 minimum wage, has improved the forecast, and we currently project the need for a 0.7 mil increase, but not until fiscal 2031. The additional good news is that a millage increase that far out in the forecast provides us the ability to significantly reduce or eliminate the need for the millage increase between now and fiscal 2031. Additionally, any of the city's American Rescue Act monies allocated to revenue recovery will also assist in reducing or eliminating the projected millage increase. Before I move on to the utility fund forecast, this might be a good time to pause for any questions on the general fund forecast.
Any questions for Mr. Ravens? Certainly is improved from what we were looking at last year at the beginning of COVID. So that is certainly a positive change. But, you know, forecasting anything out even 10 years is difficult, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it looks good.
We have to try.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Councilmember Beckman does have a question.
One question. So, it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we have like almost $22.5 million that's going to come to Clearwater from the federal government, that CARES package.
Correct.
And it has very broad descriptors on how we can use it so far?
Relatively broad, yes.
And so that 22 million, we're supposed to get over 2 years?
Yeah, we've already received 50% of it. Last week, we received 11.2 million.
Okay,
We'll receive the other half in 1 year.
in one
Yep.
year from next May?
We have until December 31st of 2024 to commit the money to projects, and we have until 2 years later, December 31 of 2026, to actually spend all of the monies. Anything not spent by that date would be returned.
Anything of the full 22 and a half?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is that money, so we have 11 million sitting in an account, is that money allocated for anywhere right now?
No, no. My understanding is we plan to have staff brainstorm, put together a list that we will prioritize, and I have the city manager present to council at a future date.
Okay. Do you feel positive that the parameters are so wide that it can fit in so many different types of?
Yeah, I believe we can spend it all, especially with the caveat, there are water sewer and projects that are permitted, and those are big projects. So with that caveat, I think there won't be an issue with spending it. It will be prioritizing it and doing the best job we can of spending it properly.
Okay, thanks.
All right, waste, water, and sewer utility fund?
Sure. We've also provided you with 6-year forecasts for each of the 4 major utility funds. 3 of the 4 funds, water and sewer, stormwater, and solid waste and recycling, recently completed rate studies in May 2021. For each, the rate study confirmed that their current rate schedules keep them on track to maintain unrestricted reserves above minimum levels for the balance of the forecast.
Jen, you want to change your slides?
Well, there's 4 of them, and I'm speaking to all of them broadly. With no changes needed to their adopted schedules of rate increases. The current year rate increases include a 4% increase in water and sewer rates, a 0% increase in stormwater rates, and a 3.75% increase in solid waste and recycling rates. Fiscal year 2022 is the last year of the 5-year rate schedule of rate increases adopted for both water and sewer and stormwater. We will be bringing new 5-year schedules of proposed rate increases to you for approval during the summer of 2022 to be effective 10/1/2022. Finally, the gas utility recently completed a rate study in January 2021. Council approved a new rate plan effective March 1st of 2021, which included some reallocation of costs from commercial to residential to more equitably charge customers for respective costs of service. The gas utility fund also projects reserves in excess of policy minimums for the 6-year forecast. In summation, all of the major utility funds are forecast to be well-funded and healthy throughout the 6-year forecast period. Annual or biennial rate studies will be completed to update forecasts and recommend rate adjustments as necessary and appropriate. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Rick? Can you talk a little bit about, certainly we see the reserves in some of the funds in excess of policy.
Correct.
Changing pretty dramatically. Some are increasing, but several are diminishing.
Speaking to the utility funds?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the philosophy right now that, and I don't want you to speak for department heads, maybe they want to speak to that, but.
Sure. The reality is we have, for the water and sewer utility fund, we have some very ambitious master plans in process. Those aren't fully reflected in the forecast currently because they're still in process. The reality is those will probably identify projects that we can't afford or that we're not willing to take the type of rate increase forward to the taxpayers that would be necessary to support it in as an aggressive manner as they're working through. But it's designed to identify our needs. We'll then have to go back to the drawing table with the rate study consultants to determine the balance of what we can afford and what type of rate increases will be needed in the future. Some of that is built into the current forecast, just not as aggressive as they expect to come forward with when the studies are completed. So that's some of the change in reserves that you're seeing. A lot of the excess reserves actually reflect cash that has been designated to capital projects, advanced funding of capital projects.
Okay.
It's still unrestricted reserves.
Right.
But we would have to not do the projects if we needed it. So, but it still counts towards excess reserves.
And are any of the mandates that were given to us so nicely this year from Tallahassee, are they included in here?
Such as?
Some of the water and sewer.
I'd have to have water and sewer speak to that because the final project plan is what they presented to the rate study consultants.
Rich, can you come up and
Rich,
speak?
please. I mean, I know the legislation's so new, I don't know that we've even had time to see how it's going to impact us.
Rich Gardner, Director of Public Utilities. They're not, they're so new, they're not directly in there, but a lot of the projects we already had on the drawing board will be able to fit into them. So I'm thinking like the Senate Bill 64, which is zero discharge. Several of our projects, if we have to do that, we'll be able to help us do that,
Okay.
as an example.
But does it mean we're gonna reprioritize certain projects perhaps?
Yeah, yes, so, we have till November to come up with a broad plan, and then once we come up with that plan, we may reprioritize projects. Similarly, the water, we're working on a water master plan, a wastewater collection system master plan. The wastewater collection system master plan, some of those projects are in these numbers, but the water plan will probably have to reprioritize some of the numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
can I have him respond to a question? So, Rich, could you just generally describe what our vulnerabilities are that's driving a lot of those projects?
The master plans have identified vulnerabilities. We have an issue with sanitary sewer overflows, that the state has increased the way they regulate on those, So the water collection master plan has identified some areas where we need to replace the sewers, we need to enlarge the sewers for storm events, lift stations and force mains. Some of those need to be increased. For example, lift station 16 down by Imagine Clearwater, that's one of them that we're increasing. And then on the water side, we're just making sure that we can produce water for the next 30 years through the master plan. And the more that we control, the less we buy from Pinellas County, the more we're in control, the more resilient we are. So.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Other questions? Councilmember Albrecht?
Yeah, Jay, looking at the reserves in excess of policy minimums.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going down some more than others. The gas utility seems to only go down about $600, but then wastewater and sewer utility fund goes down by 40,000 over from 26 to 21. I mean, is that?
You're talking about the decrease in the excess reserves?
Yeah.
Yeah. That just reflects their capital plan and their use of capital monies.
Okay, so a lot of that's capital, maybe
Yeah.
projects?
That 121 million, I would guess probably 100 million or more of that is cash that's sitting in projects for future projects.
Okay.
They're
Alright.
just getting that spent over that 6-year time period.
Well, I know we got some big projects coming up.
Yeah.
Because we just got one-on-ones with that, with the sewer and the water, so. Okay, that makes sense then. Thank you.
Any other questions? 3.3. Thank you, Mr. Ravens.
Our budget manager, Kayleen Castle, is going to discuss Penny for Pinellas.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Kayleen Castle, Budget Officer. As you know, we are in the fourth 10-year cycle of Penny for Pinellas, which was approved by Pinellas County voters in November of 2017. This project list was created by staff and the City Council in 2016, 2017, based upon needs and the best information that we had at the time. In advance of budget release and our annual public hearing, which will be held in September, we want to discuss with you several changes that we are proposing to this project list, which you last had in front of you in September. Attached to this agenda item is a red-lined working draft version of the Penny project list. And the biggest change you'll notice is the elimination of the Sandkey Bridge Replacement Fund. A memo was attached to this agenda item describing conditions of the bridge as well as updated replacement timelines, which are driving this recommendation. Tara is here if you have any additional questions for her, the engineering side. If you have any questions for her, she can come up now.
Any questions on the Sandkey Bridge replacement?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah. Also, I live down on Sand Key, and when I go to the Sand Key Civic Association meetings, this topic will come up, and so they worry about that fund being rated. So how would you answer to, how would you answer to the residents on Sand Key about that 750,000, whatever it is, or it's more than that? But how would you answer to them?
Okay, Tara Kivett, Engineering Director. So previously, to be honest, I'm not even sure when, it was identified as needing replacement in 50 years, which would be 2045. It was constructed in 1995. So we did a deeper dive. I'm a new director. I looked at this. This is kind of a red flag. It is a very conservative approach to say 50 years. And so we talked to the county and to DOT, talked to some structural engineers, and really kind of tightened that up. And given the time period it was built, the way it was built, we reviewed the plans, construction methods had changed since the 80s when bridges used to last 15 years, and using 75 years is a very solid approach. 50 was conservative, and so we have vetted that out, like I said, with the county and with DOT. And then the estimate we're using is also very conservative, and we outline that in what we propose for you. We do inspect all of our vehicular bridges once every 2 years, and Sand Key was just inspected in January of this year. And if it was going to need replacing in 50 years, it was not showing that type of deterioration to need replacement in 2045. So again, the current condition and knowing that we do these once every 2 years inspections, and in fact, we're in process right now of working with an engineering consulting firm to identify some plans and specifications to actually do those repairs. Those should happen by the end of the year. We do that every couple of years, and given all of that, I feel that this is a very solid but yet conservative approach.
Councilmember, we also did not feel comfortable allocating tax dollars that are collected between 2020 and 2030 for a project that was so far out. These were intended to be for projects within a relatively close period of time.
Okay. Just so long as we have the money when we need it, when it does need repair or replacement.
Right, so, we'll put it back on the radar. I mean, I guess that's more of a J, and Mike could kind of question when it's closer to the planned replacement.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Albritton.
And there could be federal money for replacement or infrastructure by that time.
Yes, for a large-scale replacement. Mhm.
Just something you can't count on, though.
Right.
We go through cycles where there's money and then there aren't. And with the current now, in the channel, is that a factor? The current never used to be as strong as it is now, back when Hurricane Pass was open.
Right. Well, given the results of the recent inspection, there's a little bit of scouring down there and some minor repairs, and obviously that's a little more complicated and costly to do, but overall, it's all in pretty good shape.
I have a recommendation for that.
Shovels? Shovels?
Yeah,
Shovels and reopen Hurricane Pass.
I'd love to do that.
Just get it flowing.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Gibbon.
So with this substantial delay in replacement, now estimated for 2070, like Micah just said, we don't feel it appropriate to set aside funding this early in this penny cycle that can be better utilized for other projects. Staff is recommending reallocating all $22 million to the Imagine Clearwater project. While we are still hopeful to receive other funding, such as TDC, state grants, revenues from development, this will fill the gap of that previously identified unfunded balance of $15 million. It also will provide additional funding anticipated in advance of that final GMP contract that you're expecting in a few months. While we feel this move is prudent, considering these unknowns, when additional funding is recognized, we can adjust and reallocate accordingly, and we plan to do that. So other changes on this worksheet include a reduction of $350,300 to the fire engine's ladder truck replacement project. These changes are due to recognizing Pinellas County's contribution on these engine purchases. And we are proposing to move that funding into the City Hall project. This will provide funding available in the next fiscal year to respond as necessary to site surveys or property evaluations as any opportunities are presented. And finally, the Public Safety Vehicle Equipment Facility project is being separated into two separate projects for the fire and police departments to provide for location-specific storage for their oversized vehicles. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the proposed list.
I don't recall why the proceeds in 2930 are so much lower.
It's a portion of the
Partial
year.
year.
Yeah, the penny cycle starts in
So
January,
it's not the fiscal year.
correct.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Can you explain more that last statement you made about public safety being separated into two projects?
Sure, this project originally was designed to be a combined project for oversized vehicles for both police and fire. We didn't necessarily have a location identified at the time, but it was to set aside funding for that. And both departments kind of feel that they have specific needs that would define locations. So I don't think the fire chief is here, but the police chief is if you have any additional questions. So we're just splitting that in half, which we're hopeful to be able to fund those two projects separately, but
Will it be
project
a
costs.
It'll be a little more if it's not a combined storage place?
We're not sure. From our early estimates, again, changes in construction prices, we think the fire department can definitely live within that amount. They're targeting a location at Fire Station 48, is that at Belcher? 48.
Yeah, 48.
So in their existing station compound, the police department is still kind of exploring.
Okay. Anything else on Penny? 3.4. Thank you.
Jennifer Poirier is going to come and talk about the minimum wage implementation proposal. I don't think anybody anticipated that citizens would approve that, but they have, and so now, and we have a schedule. So we have been talking to you about it, and I think we have a plan on how we can proceed ahead and do it.
Yes, good afternoon, Jennifer Poirier, Human Resources Director. As discussed with you all at our one-on-ones, the HR staff has been reviewing on how to implement the past legislation to implement the $15 an hour minimum wage that's expected, it will go into effect in 2026. And in looking around, a lot of our comparators have actually done early implementation. And so I'm going to call up HR Manager Billy Kirkpatrick to go through a presentation on how we are proposing to do an early implementation. Billy?
Oh, done. Okay, so I'm Billy Kirkpatrick from HR, as Jennifer said, and I'm going to be going kind of through the history of minimum wage and what the mandate says and what we're recommending. As she said, we're recommending that we jump to $15 an hour earlier than the mandate requires based on comparator data and compression issues that would result if we only tried to keep up with the mandate. What do I do?
Ms. Christ,
There we go.
you don't feel obligated to sit through this, do you?
Oh, no, I planned on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so over the last 20 years, this slide just kind of shows how minimum wage has increased. It's been an average of 2% per year. As a result of the mandate, we need to be at a minimum wage of $15 an hour by September 30th of 2026. If we stuck to the minimum requirements, those increases would range from 7 to 15% per year, $1 a year over the next 6 years. So aside from the fact that these annual changes are larger jumps, we haven't had to make any major adjustments before because of the distance between our lowest hourly rate for permanent employees and minimum wage. We've always been far enough ahead that this hasn't been an issue. If we continued with our typical increases of 2% a year to min, by the end of this period, our lowest 6 grades would all be at the same level. They'd all be making minimum wage. So it's really hard to see, but this is a current snapshot of our pay plan. This structure was created by PSPC, which is the firm we used for the comp and class study a couple years ago. The structure of it is that the grades are 5% apart, they're 60% wide, and our proposal will affect this structure in the first 12 of those grades. We did look at the cost of maintaining it, which was basically taking the whole structure and shifting it higher. That was a huge expense, and it really resulted in consequences that were not the intended outcome of that legislation. It resulted in increases for higher earning employees. So our proposals are going to focus on employees that make up to $20 an hour. So when we're going through and we're talking about costs, just keep in mind that any costs that I mention are in addition to our plan costs. And our plan costs in these scenarios reflect what we've been doing the last few years. 3% GWIs, 2% increases to minimum. Like she said, we reached out to our comparators. We use the same comparators over and over. These are the ones that PSPC gave us based on size and location and various attributes. And this list here shows that the majority of them have either implemented this or will by the end of this year. So they're a little bit ahead of us. Some of them kind of got there naturally based on increases they'd had in prior years. They took earlier movement toward this, and that affected their responses to the other two questions we asked them, which were, are they adjusting their pay plan to accommodate it? So we got mixed results on that. Some didn't, and some did. Those who didn't might have a little blurb that says, you know, they're going to hire employees in over the min that their pay plan says. We don't want to do that. Our proposal includes actually reflecting the rates in our pay plans. And we also asked them what compression adjustments they made. Again, mixed results. Some of them, again, didn't need to. Some of them handled them with kind of one-off pay equity increases. We are proposing formulas so that everybody is receiving the same increase or not increase. We are not suggesting compliance only, but we are presenting it. So if we were only to keep up with the law, we only adjusted employees up to meet minimum wage as required. By the end of this, we would have these 22 jobs listed here all making the same amount. And an illustration of why that is not reasonable for us is looking at the library positions. So you'd have your page, your library assistant, your senior library assistant, all clearly, you know, unique and varying levels of responsibility, making the same amount. If we did do that, the cost would be about $1 million. And that would be mostly on our temporary staff that we would be spending that on. And again, would result in that compression. We're behind the comparators, so this is not the direction we want to go. So our recommendation is to set the lowest rate for permanent full-time and part-time staff to $15 an hour and update the pay plan to reflect it. I'm going to present you two options to address the resulting compression, and we're going to be looking for your guidance on the direction to go in for that. So scenario one involves addressing compression by giving an extra 0.5% to 2.5% in addition to the merit increase for employees making between $15 and $20 an hour. The cost of that in the first year is just over $1 million, and over the span of those 6 years, it's $7.4 million. The second scenario involves adjusting for compression a little bit more thoroughly. And that would be moving staff, basically keeping them with their same range penetration. So if somebody is 40% through their range previous to the adjustments, we move the range, we stick them 40% through, and then give them their merit increases. So that's more expensive. That version is 1.8 million in the first year and 12.4 overall. So that brings me to the summary page. Two things to note, regardless of the option you choose. First, whatever we do when it affects the CWA, that's going to be something that we have to bargain with them for. And we touched on that during our one-on-ones. And the second issue is that we do expect further adjustments. So as as this continues to roll out and the market changes, there is a possibility that we'll need to either, readdress this or move jobs through the ranges or make other changes.
Well, thank you for the one-on-ones. That was a good informative meeting for everybody. We are obviously not voting on anything today, but I want to give everyone a chance to ask additional questions now that they've had the opportunity to digest this information. When will we expect to see this on an agenda?
So if we have consensus to move forward, we would put it on the next agenda to bring it forward, because we want to implement for October 1. So I would need to start negotiating with the CWA. So that would be the next step, would be to negotiate with them and then
It would be an
bring.
easy negotiation.
I would hope so. I have already reached out to them to let them know that we were having these conversations. So obviously we'd be giving their members increases. However, not every member would get the same increase. And there is still compression, like we talked about in our
Right.
one-on-ones. And so that's still not necessarily an easy conversation to have with them. So with permission, I can certainly begin those conversations with them to negotiate that. And then I can bring forward the updated agreement with an MOU or however we want to bring forward the CWA, because that would probably be the next step to implement, because they're all CWA. There's only a couple SAMP positions that would be affected by going to the $15 an hour effective 10/1.
I mean, we have scenario 1 and 2, but there is a third scenario. We could just follow the mandate of the legislation, just so people understand that.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously not staff's recommendation, but I would hope, CWA would take that into account, that we're being proactive.
Correct, and that's what the language that we have in the contract, is that nobody will make less than minimum wage. So, to follow the contract, that's what we would do. And that is why, when we reached out to both, or actually specifically when we reached out to the city of St. Pete, that they haven't updated their pay ranges, is because of negotiations and unions, and being able to reach agreements with them, so.
Okay. Questions? Councilmember Becker?
Your statement that you just made about, but there is a fourth scenario, I thought that.
Third.
A third, that's compliance cost, that's what we mean, right? That's just following the rule of law, okay,
Right.
I just wanted to make sure there wasn't another option that I.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Horn?
So the intent is to have this in the preliminary budget? I mean, so we-
Yes, that would be the intent, is to have this in the budget, and then begin negotiations with the CWA so that we would be ready to implement for 10/1,
So this would be a second meeting in June or first meeting in June?
depending on how quickly.
We would need to do it by the second meeting in June. We need direction by the second meeting.
Okay.
So, what are the feelings about scenario 1 versus 2? Staff is recommending scenario 2,
Correct.
and everybody is seeing the spreadsheet on, obviously, the impact. It is far more palatable than I thought it was going to be. So, I know we're having competitive issues. I want to retain good employees. I want our employees to be able to have a reasonable standard of living. So I'm going to support scenario 2 in our staff. But I also hope that some of the folks understand with these negotiations. I will frankly be very disappointed if this is a problem.
I support scenario 2 as well.
As I told you, I do too.
I'm fine with 2. I mean, there's a little bit of pain involved in it. I mean, financially, there's definitely, you're biting down a little harder, but I think the city deserves, and we need the ability to retain and recruit the best we can get, and this is what it's going to take to do that. Let's do it.
Okay.
You know, I asked in the 101, can we pay for it? And we can, so I think we should.
You have your guidance.
Thank you. I will begin negotiations right away.
All right,
Thank you.
we're going to take a 10-minute recess. Good afternoon. We will reconvene the May 25th, 2021 special meeting. We are on item 3.5.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. I'm going to make a few comments while Gina comes up and prepares to give you a presentation. She and I talked about the code enforcement conversation, during the course of a year. I'll hear comments. You all will talk to me about some of the code enforcement issues. I do think in this particular case, I think the mayor has been pretty clear about how he's approached code enforcement. That was one of the planks in his campaign. There may have been planks in some of the others' campaigns as well. And then we've had some conversations. So what I asked Gina to do was just sort of summarize some aspects of code enforcement staffing, because that always tends to surface, as a way to approach it. And then I've also, you'll notice, we have our code enforcement staff here. I've always asked them to come and be in the audience when code enforcement is discussed. So what you're looking at some of our very junior code enforcement staff to our most senior and our most experienced. You've got people out there in the audience who can bend your ear if you want to talk code enforcement. And so I didn't want them to miss this conversation, and I didn't want you to miss them in case you had some burning questions that only the staff that's out there on the street every day can actually answer. So that's why they're here.
Well, I want to thank all of them because I know it's a thankless job oftentimes. And I really believe it's incredibly important within the city. So thank you. You probably don't hear that from us enough, but really appreciate it. So.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Clayton.
Good afternoon, Gina Clayton, Planning and Development. As Mr. Horn indicated, we had this conversation about how we might increase resources in code compliance to meet some of the concerns that you may have. And we originally approached it as doubling the staff level. So what I'd like to do is, before I get into these scenarios that I included in your agenda item, is just give you an overview of the current budget and staff levels, and just very briefly, generally, how staff spends their time. As you all know, we are tasked with two functions. One is to ensure that our property owners adhere to adopted property maintenance and use standards, and then the other is to administer and enforce the city's business tax receipt program, which generates approximately $2 million a year that goes back into general fund revenues. Right now, our division has a budget of $1.2 million, a little over, and we have 14 full-time employees, and we have one seasonal part-time employee. There's a division manager, and we have 10 inspectors. One is assigned to sign enforcement, and the 9 other inspectors are deployed out in geographic zones which they patrol. Another position is an inspection specialist who provides support for more difficult cases, does our short-term rentals enforcement program, and provides training and support for code board cases. There's also 2 development review technicians who administer the BTR program and field all the calls that we get into the department for both code compliance and business tax receipts. And then we also have, as I mentioned, this part-time customer service rep who helps us. As I detailed in the memo, our inspectors are tasked with responding to complaints as well as proactively patrolling their zones. They identify violations and they work with owners to resolve them. They try to get compliance either by knocking on the door or leaving a door hanger. And then if that doesn't really get the results, they go to issuing a notice to appear or notice of violation. And then, of course, if those efforts fail, we move it forward to MCEB or county court for resolution. On average, we think the inspectors spend about half of their time in the field, another 35% doing administrative tasks associated with case management, and about 15% on customer contact through phones and email. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I was asked to prepare costs for doubling our staff. And while we have 14 positions now in the division, really 11 are devoted to code enforcement, and 2 of those are specialized. So I based the doubling on the zone inspectors, and then looked at how we would need to support those inspectors with any additional positions. So this led to a proposal of a total of new FTEs in the, wait a minute, sorry, all the tongue-tied. It includes a total of 11 new FTEs. 9 of those would be inspectors. 1 would be a supervisor, and 1 would be a customer service representative, and then we would convert an existing position to a supervisory position. So I want to show you the way the current zones work. And we have a total of 9. So you can see these light-colored areas are in the county, so our zones are divided up. And we try to give people sort of if it's not an equal land area, it's more of a concentration and density of structures that they have to manage. So that's the current scenario. So in the one that I'm talking about now, this would increase the zones from 9 to a total of 17. And we would also have 1 dedicated BTR enforcement inspector. The annual budget increase would be over $824,000 to accomplish this. And I think that you can see from the zones, we don't probably need quite as many zones. I think that there could be some unintended consequences with this level of enforcement. Some of the zones are pretty small, and there could be some perceived ideas that we're picking on people. So I think this is probably more than necessary. What I'd like to do, or what I wanted to do once we saw really what that doubling of staff would be, to give you some other scenarios that might help you better hone in on the types of improvements that you would like to see. So I have 2 other ones that I included in the memo. One I called, just for lack of better name, is a more robust scenario that would kind of be like an ideal situation, and then one that I felt was a little more strategic or provide some incremental opportunities to see if we could get some improvements that meet your goals. So the
Can
first,
you just talk about the methodology to even get to those zones that we're looking at?
well, I think what we did is we started with the zones that we have, and just based on our understanding and knowledge of these zones, we tried to break it down to be appropriate. Some areas have a lot more structures. Our older areas of the city, you have multiple dwellings on a property, older stock of building, a lot more violations than you do in some of the newer areas. And then some of the areas up here, we do have a lot of county land, so they look larger than some of the other ones. So I don't know if there was more method to our madness on that, but I think that's what we tried to look at, knowing the areas now like we do and where it might make sense to draw those lines.
So like 7 is top of the world, if I can see that right.
Right, yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right.
That's
We don't have
correct.
code enforcement in top of the world.
No, that's her
It's
point.
unincorporated.
That's the point.
Because it's a bigger area.
Right, the zone's so
Right,
big.
right. I mean, we have a significant concentration of structures in 11, 12, 15, 4, 3, 6. There's greater density in those areas.
So there might be greater density, but I'm looking at like Sand Key, you're not getting calls over by Sand Key probably much, but you would be in North Beach. So did you take into account, along with the number of structures, the number of calls that you get?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we looked at all of that, and this is,
I
not
know, it's just a-
perfect.
I-
It was really just more to give you an idea of what it might look like.
Okay.
Those lines could move in, any number of ways, but this would just give you our first kind of draft at what that could look like.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm calling the more robust scenario, that would include a total of 20.5 FTEs, which is 6 more than we currently have funded, and that would increase our budget by about $448,000. That proposal would include a total of 4 inspectors. Again, we would dedicate one of those to BTR inspections, and the other 3 would support an increase from 9 to 12 zones. This option would also include 2 other new positions, a supervisor and a customer service representative, and we'd likely convert our existing inspection specialist position to a supervisor as well. I'm going to, again, this is just for representation, but this is what we might, look at if we had 12 zones instead of 9. And you can see little bigger size, more manageable, and I don't think you would have the level of nitpicking that you might if we had a lot more zones and smaller zones. And then the other option that I thought would be useful for you to consider is one of just making some incremental changes. And that would retain our existing 9 zone inspectors as they are, but add a BTR inspector and a customer service representative, because those positions could relieve the inspectors for some of the administrative work that they're tasked with doing, as well as BTR inspection. So this proposal would increase staff levels from 14.5 FTEs to 17.5, and that would increase our budget by about $218,000. A couple things that I do want to point out about the numbers. First of all, in the presentation, I gave you the annual cost, not the one-time budget year cost. And another is that I did not include any cost to build cubicles, have furniture for these people. It does include all the costs to have equipment and vehicles and those things, but not furniture. And honestly, I don't know exactly where they would sit if we have new staff members, because we're pretty much tapped out in our space as it is now. So with that, I'll stop. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Ken's here. He can answer any questions for you as well.
So is ideal staffing your recommendation?
Our ideal staffing is the ideal. I think based on conversations with our inspectors, they believe that they could have some more success with a limited approach. My recommendation would be probably a little more conservative, have this kind of strategic approach, and then reevaluate. See what we can accomplish with, the 3 FTEs, and reassess. And if we're still not satisfying some of the concerns that you have, then look at increasing.
Questions? Councilmember Beckman.
First of all, it's nice to see the code inspectors here, so thank you for being here. I can't imagine what your job is like. I bet you have a ton of stories. So thank you for doing that work, because I hear about it all the time. We have people, I'm sure you're aware, that email every week with photos, and they're frustrated. But I also have spent a number of, meetings with our city attorney about the limitations of enforcing fines and fees, and that's got to be frustrating. So I had a couple questions. Number one, does code enforcement go out on the weekends or evening hours, or?
We do have a weekend inspector, and they rotate it. So every Saturday, sometimes Sunday, we will have one inspector. We have a list of properties that other inspectors say, hey, can you check on this issue? And then they usually hit the main thoroughfares and just make sure things, are clean and there's not excessive signage.
Okay.
That's usually how we approach it.
Because sometimes I think it might be easier to catch people, between 5 and 8 or 9 at night.
I think with the robust version, we had talked about the possibility of having people assigned where their shifts were on the weekends. But again, if your zone is, you're assigned a zone. So, whether a weekend shift always needs to be done or not, I think we'd have to work through a situation like that. I don't think it's necessary that they have to work, always on the weekends.
But I would think, like, if you have a particular problem where this violation tends to happen at 7 at night, could you
we
give
do
the person
that.
a couple hours to target it? Yeah.
Yeah, we do that. We've had quite a few issues where, someone calling to say they do this always after a certain time, and so we do go out and do special inspections.
Okay. And then I had a question about, so if the state law is in effect in July 1st, that reports of code violations by residents or anyone, you have to have your name and address. And so I'm wondering we don't know what the consequences of that will be. I mean, will that mean that the code inspectors have a lighter load initially? I would bet probably. And then now they're out in their vehicles surveying, right? So is that going to reduce the paperwork because they don't have, you know what I mean?
We're a complaint-driven city to an extent.
Well, we
right?
do a lot of proactive, because if we get a complaint about one thing, our inspectors are told, check the whole street for the violation. So I think we do a lot of proactive. I think we do a lot more than, say, we did 10 years ago. We've, done that. We do get a lot of anonymous complaints. We get a lot of anonymous complaints that aren't violations. So a lot of people do lodge complaints for things that turn out not to be violations. And we do have habitual complainers that call in multiple violations in their neighborhood, and most of them, in many cases, are not violations. And that takes up a lot of our staff's time.
Do you want to add something?
Yes, no, I think Gina did touch it.
Come on to the mic though, please.
Ken Pieslak, Code Enforcement Manager. We do meet weekly as a staff and go over any problem areas in any zones. And the staff is very good about adjusting their schedules. If there's an evening issue, sometimes coming in at 5 a.m. if there's an early morning issue, to address that issue. So they do that in addition to the weekend inspector. As far as the anonymous complaints, I don't see that having a large impact on our caseload. It may actually give the code inspectors more time to do some more proactive things that they haven't been able to do. But I can assure you one thing, we just had a staff meeting that Gina attended, and introduced our new city attorney, and she went over this briefly with the staff, and the staff was very, very imperative. They felt it was imperative that we bring on a customer service rep. That's going to be a very important part of this, because they're constantly answering the phone when they're in the office trying to input a case. We have two DRTs working on BTRs that are also answering the phone. So we have no one dedicated to just phone calls coming in for code enforcement. And we really need that. It would be very helpful to our division, in addition to the inspector. And the BTR end, as far as having a dedicated, as far as having a dedicated BTR inspector, that could be very beneficial to the city and to these folks that are in the field every day. We just did we're wrapping up what we call a red project, where BTRs that have not been paid have fallen in the red. And that was 2,000 of them that had to be divided up amongst these inspectors in their zones, and they had to go out and determine whether the business still existed, et cetera, and make contact, and those people then had to contact one of the DRTs about getting their account up to snuff.
Vice Mayor.
Well, I think, and also, thank you all for being here. Your job is a thankless but ultimately necessary function. There's many layers to code enforcement. You've got, properties that just refuse to come into compliance, trouble properties. You've got other properties that don't really realize that they're out of compliance, and when it's brought to their attention, the property owner does the right thing and does what they are, and then, other ones that just absolutely ignore whatever comes their way. But I think from what Gina presented, my recommendation, I want to right-size the organization and the department. And I think the best way to get there is in small steps. Let's, do your conservative approach to start. And if that shows the results we're looking for, then we're getting where we need to be. You said that the customer service representative is a vital position to create and have. So, I would think if we took the conservative approach, see if that works, and if after it's implemented, it shows to work, fantastic. If the determination after that is we still need X number, we can talk about that. But I rather than taking a larger step, I think smaller steps will ultimately get us where we want to be.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Beck?
I just had a question. This comes from, I had a meet and greet on Saturday and was talking about this code compliance issue and the state legislation that came down. So have you been given any guidance about how to verify somebody's name and address? So one of the people who was there said, well, I can just call in and say I'm Sue Smith who lives at Main Street, I mean, how involved is that going to be if people are reporting a code issue?
We've had some discussion about that, especially with our computer system where people log complaints. We need to work with IT because people can submit anonymous ones. I mean, at this point, if we get anonymous complaints, we'll just ignore them because we're not allowed to act upon those. But I don't know if we've worked out all of those issues. And does the legislation say they have to give an address to?
I'm not certain.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to work on that. But yeah, our inspectors have already raised that issue that they could get all kinds of names. And you can imagine if we're forced, and we'll work with legal on this, but if we're forced to locate that person, that's going to just, that's not going to work for us. So I'm sorry I don't have a full answer because we're still working on the actual how we're going to implement it.
So anything any of you have to convey to us, if you're comfortable?
Come on, Ryan.
Take advantage
Don't get
of
this
it.
chance every day.
There we go.
Take advantage of it.
How's everyone doing today?
We're doing
Ryan Odegaard, Code Inspector with the City of Clearwater. Good to see everybody. It's just what Ken and Gina both said. The huge issue that we have in the office is nobody is dedicated to answer the phones for us. And it's like when we have to answer the phones when they're ringing because DRTs are doing something that they're doing for their job, it's just a cycle that's never ending. And we're never going to get anywhere unless somebody is hired for that specific role. Gina mentioned 2,000 BTRs were in the red status. That generates $2 million for the city. Why not dedicate one inspector to do that job? So we need it. It'll drastically increase what we can do and how we can serve the citizens of the city. So, just from our end.
Sounds logical to me.
But if anybody has any questions, we're here, so we'd love to answer them.
Well, I mean, you've obviously all seen these different proposals. Which one would you choose?
So when Gina came to our meeting last week and they mentioned doubling the inspectors, all of us were like, no, we don't need that. We're all very comfortable in our zones. We're all able to manage our workload over our zones. And like Ken said, I would say 80% of what I do right now, it's proactive. I'm not getting a ton of calls saying, hey, this is what's going on. It's when I get one call to go out and then I go and drive through the neighborhood, that's when I see everything else. One BTR person to handle BTRs, the red status, also doing BTR inspections, one customer service person to answer phone calls, and then one supervisor. 3 additional staff members would eliminate 90% of our problems.
Does everyone else feel the same way?
At the very least.
Come on up, Shelby. You don't have to be bashful. How long have you been here?
Shelby Brown, Code Inspector, City of Clearwater, 18 years, Mayor.
Very good.
Yes. As they said, at the very least, to have that. And when I think of us having more staff in that capacity, the property inventory is aging in Clearwater. And there was a time when I first started when we had additional staff. There was an administrative manager in addition to the code compliance manager. We had multiple levels of support staff, so code inspectors could work on upholding the codes that the city has. Properties stayed better maintained, problems didn't get out of hand, you could work with people. That's been over for years because we lost staff, we lost ground that way, and we want to elevate our inventory, our property, our neighborhoods, our businesses. So this is a chance. And if we can move in that direction, I think you would find the citizens, everybody, all the taxpayers would be in a better position.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yep, here we go.
I'm Jason Hauser, I'm one of the code inspectors. One of the things I think that the council should be aware of is the enforcement mechanisms that we have are somewhat limited. One of the big problems we have is we get lots of fines assessed on properties and liens, but the foreclosures and actual reclaiming those funds never really happens. So that's something I think that we need to, with the new city attorney coming in, need to look at and address as well. So I think that's something important for you to consider. Thank you.
Okay.
We have had that discussion. We are very aware of it, and I am aware that he does not agree with what we're doing. Nonetheless, the law is what the law is.
All right. We'll have that discussion. Anything else from you, Tim?
Nothing.
So, Mr. Horn,
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, do we do this incrementally, or do we, is it evolutionary or revolutionary?
Well, I think the sentiment that I think reflects the majority opinion among the staff is what was just outlined, the 3 FTEs. And I think that creates a baseline for future evaluation after they've assessed, how well that works. I told Gina to start with doubling the staff simply as a starting point. I never did feel like doubling the staff was going to be a viable solution, cost being one of the reasons, but we had to start somewhere. And I think that the staff's involvement in the conversation with Gina and Ken, I think was very healthy. And I feel a lot more comfortable with the 3 because I think they've given that some thought. I think if they really felt the 3 didn't work, I think they would say that. I mean, you've given them the opportunity to go higher, but it's something that has to be managed. And so I think this time next year, when you all are looking at the next year's budget, I think, having this meeting, because you should have this meeting next year as well, you'll be able to revisit, hey, how well have we done?
Well, and that was my next question. So how are we going to measure the incremental improvement if we add whatever the number is?
Well, I think we already have some internal measures, especially on the BTR side. I think we will probably have to develop some measures of what does success look like with regard to the enforcement piece. And I can't say from here what that would look like, but I think the staff should be able to come up with some measures that are realistic and are really based on the actual work in the field.
Ken, have you thought about that?
I think we can work.
Come on up to the mic. For those watching at home,
I think we have had some preliminary discussion on that, and I think we could work out a measurable program to look at and compare now versus then where we're at. The problem I think from a citizen standpoint, from the phone calls I receive, is there are a number of citizens that feel more code enforcement officers are going to take care of our problem properties that go on for months and months and months. That's never going to be the case. You could double the size of code enforcement, and these properties like we're dealing with at 10 North Aurora, that's not going to go away. We've exhausted every means that we can, and now the city attorney's office is going to look into the foreclosure aspect on that. But that's a constant, at least twice a week, we're getting calls on that particular property. And Inspector Kasman has opened up 14 cases since early 2020, and the liens are accruing on these, and it's just going nowhere.
$76,000
Gina, do you have something to add?
on that one property.
I guess I would like to maybe hear what your concerns are, because I think you put this on the agenda because of your concerns about maybe lack of code enforcement or what we're not achieving. So to develop measures, it may be helpful for us to also hear from you what your expectations are with the program.
Well, my concerns are, and we put it in some of the strategic talking points, is, and it goes to Shelby's point, we are an aging city. Countryside is our newest neighborhood at 50 plus years. I mean, we have little enclaves that have been built with, 5 or 6 houses, but I'm talking about honest to goodness neighborhoods. And so I'm not seeing, first of all, the reinvestment. That's not code enforcement, obviously. That's another issue. But when you have problem properties within neighborhoods, it makes them less desirable. It makes their neighbors less apt, perhaps, to improve upon their properties, or new people to move in and start to improve upon their properties. So it's, a negative loop, which I want to end. I'm concerned about, illegal vacation rentals. I think that has an enormous impact on a neighborhood. I don't care who you are, if you're on vacation, you behave a little bit differently, and the number of people and everything else. And then just, I sent you one today on a business. I know it's illegal what they've got out there, and I just want to stay on top of things, because I think that is a reflection for our residents and also for our visitors, how the entire city looks. If we're going to live up to that tagline, bright and beautiful Bay to Beach, which we have not yet achieved, it is aspirational in my opinion, then I think we need more code enforcement.
I appreciate that feedback. We are an aging community. We're competing with Pasco County and Hillsborough for residents, and if our commercial corridors are not maintained, they are the entryway into our city. We need our neighborhoods to be strong. I couldn't agree more. I've worked in places where, as I've told you before, we had, I'll call it a fleet of housing inspectors, where they did interior and exterior housing inspections. They did point of sale inspections. So there's other tools out there that are being used to help achieve some of these goals, but none of them are perfect. We're going to have situations, as like Ken described, that are just because of due process reasons, violators are given so many rights, and then the neighborhood has to endure. Those are big challenges. But there's more that we could do, sure. I mean, programmatically with how we handle inspections to address some of your concerns.
I thank you for what you're all doing. That's not the issue.
Sure, no,
I just want to give you
understand.
more resources so we get into a virtuous cycle.
Sure. Well, I mean, we can grow Ken's empire with any number, but I also want to be, frugal with our resources and actually achieve what it is you want us to achieve without going overboard.
I just think there's an ROI on code inspections. Talk about the BTRs, if we could close half of those.
Right.
But also just upgrading the rest of the properties. And the one thing we have that realtors will always tell you versus Pasco is location, location, location.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Good. All right, thank you for your feedback.
all right, 3.6.
Chief Slaughter's going to come and talk to you about the Real-Time Crime Center. This is a capability that is only going to grow and will, I think, give us a level of responsiveness that, I think a lot of people have always desired, and I think we're seeing some of that impact already.
Good morning or afternoon. Dan Slaughter, Chief of Police. I want to talk to you about the Crime Center and kind of give you an overview of what it is, what it's achieved, and kind of what we're trying to accomplish with it. To first just kind of lay out what our vision for this center was to build an advanced command center that we could use to monitor and evaluate, deter criminal activity, and do that in real time so that we could leverage this technology to create a safer city by providing that real-time feedback to the officers that are responding in the field. You probably heard of the common phrase of first 48 making a big difference in homicide cases. I think that's true for all crime. The ability to close and bring closure to a criminal case is certainly significantly higher. That the estimates are like 50% drop in the ability to solve a crime after first 48 hours. So in addition to that, the ability for a deterrent to be effective requires three things: certainty, celerity, and severity. So severity is something I think that the criminal justice system is struggling with at this particular time, but the most efficient component of that deterrence is that certainty. So by having the increased ability for us to kind of make stronger police actions as opposed to being more reactionary and kind of actually closing that loop and making more arrests for criminal activity, I think will improve our ability to make the deterrent factor be effective. Our center is kind of structured very similar to what you would see at like, a NASA command center and any other real-time crime center. It includes a couple photos up here for you to look at that show the importance of some of the technology that I'll talk about. You can certainly see the situational awareness the section provides. These are the major components to the Real-Time Crime Center. The first and foremost at the top is that video wall, and that is that situational awareness that is provided to the operators in the room. It is a software-based video wall that is interactive with any type of, it's kind of hardware agnostic so that it can provide the supervisor who's running the center the ability to kind of direct the multitasking that needs to occur with the analysts. The Live Earth platform, working kind of clockwise, is a visualization platform, so it receives data from multiple different platforms and puts them into one singular interactive map that the operator can then use. For example, if a call were to present itself to the officer or to the analyst as she's in the crime center, they can look at that platform and see what type of video cameras are available to them to access and review. The BriefCam product is an analytics software. That product allows the analysts to do a lot with video. It allows them to make the video searchable and do it in such a rapid way. Some of the capabilities of this particular analytical software is, say we're looking for a missing child with red swimsuit on the beach. You can take 2 hours of video, you can actually select children and red swimsuit, and it will remove all of the other parties and just show you that person. Once you identify the one you're looking for, it'll then play that person and track them through any other of the videos available so that you can then, of course, hopefully find that lost child or any other particular suspect that may be, it works just the same for a car or for a suspect.
It's cool and scary all at the same time.
It is. Yes. Moving on. First to the item at the bottom is it's a tool that uses open source information, social media, just regular information that's available to anyone, and basically just coalesces it into a mini profile and associates it with an address. So if we're working, say, some form of a hostage situation or some other volatile domestic situation, we are able to get some information in real time, potentially see what's going on in the person's social media at that particular moment, and even use that as mechanisms to contact and open up a dialogue and hopefully de-escalate a situation. PenLink is a software tool that is used to kind of analyze like cellular phone data and mapping data associated with that. It's not necessarily one that is used rapidly in real time, but more as a tool to use to try to develop criminal leads or identify additional information, locate a missing person, such that kind of stuff. The milestone, and I'll talk more about license plate reader later, but the milestone is the video management system for video cameras. So you're able to bring multiple different video camera platforms, different vendors, and bring it into one singular system to try to make it a little more manageable. The city has over 600 cameras, security cameras, on the facilities that it is responsible for throughout the city, whether it's your MSB building, this library, City Hall, and currently there's many on Clearwater Beach Beach Walk. We hope to expand this coverage at some point and have it built into the Imagine Clearwater plan. Crest Lake Park has kind of the fiber optic is pre-run so that stuff can be added the cameras can be added in the near future. This will have an expense to the city. I've talked to Dan Mayer. His estimate is over the next 5 to 10 years, it could cost anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million to really fully realize a built-out, security camera structure. We're a big city with a lot of parks, a lot of facilities, and I think people are really expecting in some, at least the major places, for you to have that kind of coverage and technology. The license plate reader technology, we currently have 4, 2 that are attached mobile to a vehicle and 2 that are smart trailers, and we utilize that technician to read license plates that go past a particular location, and it'll flag if it's a stolen vehicle or a terrorist or a wanted person or something of that nature. We hope to expand that. Currently, we're testing a product out that's solar-based that would allow us to kind of just track the major arterials and the collector roads, so that if we are to have a murder case and it's a white vehicle, we're very easily be able to kind of identify that vehicle and track it relatively quickly. And we hope to expand that technology into the next fiscal year. It'd probably be about $60,000 is the estimate for the next fiscal year, and that would be a product or even a technology that could be advanced further if it's successful. Some of the other key technology that integrates with the real-time center are our drones. We currently have a drone program with 2 drones. One is a larger drone that's used out in the field, and one is a smaller one used by the tactical teams to kind of go into a residence so that we don't have to expose and basically produce a conflict with the person inside. The drones are currently being evaluated to be replaced. The expense of that could be about $75,000 to $110,000. We'd like to try to move towards having a patrol-based drone program so that they're actually more in the field so they could be used more rapidly. There was House Bill 44 that is headed to the governor to be signed, or will, I don't believe he's vetoed it, but if he hasn't signed it yet, it would become law even if he doesn't sign it. But it's kind of thrown a little monkey wrench into our ability to plan for this replacement that we're currently in need of, because there is language in there that requires the state to develop a list of authorized vendors. And that list is not going to be posted until January of 2022, and you would have to use one of the vendors on that list by January 23. So I don't want to buy one and have to cycle out of it. So we're kind of in a little bit of a flux right now, despite the fact that ours need to be replaced. The Axon body-worn camera program that the council directed us to implement, we did obtain or implement the live view remote feature too. So if we have an officer that's in distress or in need of assistance, or even when we do some of the SWAT scenario or the SWAT entries, we can turn the camera on live view and it can be monitored from the center, and so we can see certain things. And if we lose contact with an officer, we can activate the camera to kind of identify where they are. Hopefully they're not in the bathroom or something like that, but that would be bad. We also have the ability with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department's helicopter to download the video link and watch their video in real time as well. Their red light camera has a video feature, and we hope in the future to kind of expand into a public-private partnership, so that as we have relationships with many of our, say like the hotels on the beach or other businesses, that we have a system that we want to develop where they can give us access to certain video cameras that they want to give us access. Say, for example, say like Best Shalom, we would like to have access to their exterior cameras and maybe the lobby, and they could potentially give us that. And then if we had an issue or a concern there, we'd be able to access that relatively rapidly. Same with like bank alarms as well. Currently, the center is staffed with what I'll call a hybrid model. We're still kind of implementing these technologies and getting them set up in a robust way. So we're using our current 3 analysts and our 3 intelligence detectives, but they do have dual responsibilities currently at this time, so they're balancing both roles. As we continue to develop this, the technology and have more tools available for them to use, we will want to migrate to having a dedicated staff that approaches, or that handles this center. The department has some potential positions that it's looking to reallocate for this particular purpose, so it's not a complete ask right now or anything, but something we're looking to do. We've had some very good successes with the program year to date. In April, there was a situation where an officer, or we received a call about an intoxicated person that was brandishing a gun down at the marina downtown. The real-time crime center was able to access the video cameras available to them, identify where the person was, track them, so that we were able to, with this person operating within the proximity of people, we were able to kind of identify the most advantageous position for us to kind of take him into custody and really kind of overwhelm the situation, so we didn't have to deal with a volatile exchange of firearms. And they were also able to kind of provide some of that background, kind of whether or not he had concealed weapons permits and all those other things, so that we could make sure that we're following all the technical laws required. And then another success was on Clearwater Beach. We had an officer that witnessed a fight. He started taking some police action, kind of developed a very large crowd. The real-time center was able to monitor that, kind of provide what they would call overwatch, keep an eye on what was going on. There were some officers that got battered. The familiar video to many would be the subject that escaped from the car. They were able to track that subject and get him safely into custody and identify some of the other people and take people into, locate them on the video so the officers could be directed to go get them at a time that was not agitating the crowd any further than it already was, and a very efficient execution of their duties and responsibilities. So moving forward, we're going to continue to implement the technology and become, integrating it into our operation. The staff is going to eventually we're going to want to migrate less from a hybrid model and more to a dedicated team that focuses on this center. We want to provide more efficient responses with safer outcomes, increase the frequency in which we solve cases and the time in which it takes to solve them, and also have it as a mechanism to monitor areas of concerns. I know at a recent meeting there was, what are you doing about Pier 60 after 9? That gives us the ability to keep an eye on those particular areas and direct officers. It won't replace officers completely. I mean, there's going to need to be that presence factor that we'll need to cover, but we do believe it'll supplement it and make us more efficient. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the chief? Councilmember Albritton.
Chief, do you have cameras in the beach parking garage? Do we have one on every floor there?
Well, the North Mandalay has cameras, and we are talking about getting access to them. We don't have live access to them, no, but it does have cameras. The North Beach one, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah. I just heard there's been some activity in there that hasn't been good lately. I know we saw one video of a fight that took place a couple of months ago, but I've had some friends that park in there, and they said they kind of feared for not for their life, but it's just, it wasn't a good beach kind of feel in there.
Yeah, the proliferation of the bars and everything on that has created a different atmosphere in that. I know we've talked to Ms. Kivett through the engineering department that kind of manages more of that parking component. They have added, not engineering, but the management of the garage has added some additional people to try to address it a little more efficiently.
Okay.
We actually had a conversation even this morning about the video and kind of working out the access. There's a different technology that I think I'll have to implement to make that efficient, aside from these. Not very expensive.
Okay, thank you.
We heard that when we had the meeting out on the beach a couple of weeks ago, so I think it's definitely on the chief's radar, right?
Yeah, many.
Councilmember Beckman.
I had a resident contact me a week or so ago, and I had shared with you his concerns about wanting some cameras in his neighborhood to take care of some problem areas, and he didn't really identify the problem areas. But are there cameras are these cameras easily movable throughout the city at different problem areas, or is there a big expense in deciding where to put it and how long to keep it in a particular area?
So there are certain cameras that we have available to us that are mobile that we can transition very easily to other particular areas. They're obviously, we limit them to crime patterns and trends. We're not going to arbitrarily put them in certain areas. So there is a certain criteria we like to follow and try to make sure that we concur with the problem. But yes, we do have tools for that. And they're in different formats. Some are surreptitious and some are not.
And then what about the possibility of having cameras at our parks that have bathrooms that are not unlocked? And have those cameras on from like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 9 to 9 or something like that?
Yeah, in the development of, like, say, for Crest Lake, for example, I certainly advocated for the cameras there, and they did run the technology. There was concern about building it into the development of the park because you don't really know what the canopy is going to look like with all the trees and the blockage, and if you put them on a map, then somebody puts it there, and I'm staring at a tree trunk, right? So Mr. Mayor and I have talked about that, and he is actually budgeting and planning for that expansion of that technology should the council believe it to be important. I believe it's very important at some of these major parks for us to have that tool at this point moving forward.
What we have talked about with Imagine, I'm hoping we're going to have some presence there with as big a park as it is and all the activities.
Yes.
I think it is a deterrent. I am sensitive to too many cameras, but I think it's a good tool to have in your toolbox.
Yeah.
So this is not a specific ask yet, because we really don't have any budget numbers, and we're certain camera costs and some FTEs and whatnot, but are we gonna see this as a formalized ask?
The cameras should be a formalized ask that would come from Mr. Mayor, probably more than me.
It is built into his capital budget. This was more informational from the approval that we had a couple of years ago.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Chief. 3.7.
Denise Anderson is going to come forward and discuss social services funded by the city of Clearwater. We have, for the most part, straight-lined our funding to certain providers. And because they're general fund dollars, I have been very reluctant to expand the use of those monies to providers. We did increase contributions to Pinellas Hope, but we also received a reduction from Salvation Army. That there was money we were giving them and they didn't need as much, so we were able to kind of realign some of that funding, and Pinellas Hope truly have improved their services. But because of conversations that we've had from others of you about this, in particular Councilmember Beckman, we thought that this would be a very important topic for you all to discuss, because if it has to do with increasing the funding, then that is something you all would have to corporately agree to do.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Denise Anderson, Economic Development and Housing. Good afternoon, last but not least. And unfortunately, nothing flashy to show you like the chief just had. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to reiterate everything that was in the narrative provided in your agenda, but I do want to point out a couple of things that I think will provide some context for the focus of what I believe this discussion is really going to center around. So, as you know, ED&H currently receives funding from the federal government through HUD in the form of CDBG and HOME, and from the state through Florida Housing Finance Corporation in the form of SHIP funds. And use of these funds is restricted by regulations that accompany the dollars. And while home and SHIP funds must be used to produce housing-related outcomes, CDBG funds can be used as direct grants to support delivery of public or social services and to fund facility improvements of those same organizations. And in addition to the CDBG funding for social services, as Mr. Horn just shared with you, the department also allocates $250,000 now annually to 6 organizations in Pinellas County that provide homelessness or homeless prevention services to Clearwater citizens. And over the past 10 years, I only looked at 10 years, about $6.2 million in CDBG and general fund monies have been allocated to support social service programs and facilities. And to give some context there, the general fund allocation comprises about 36% of that dollar amount. And while numerous types of public services are supported by CDBG funding, most are tied to root causes of homelessness, which according to the National Law Center of Homelessness and Poverty include the lack of affordable housing, which of course we address with home and SHIP, unemployment, poverty and low wages, and mental illness and substance abuse, and the lack of needed services to treat those crippling conditions or concerns. And in terms of the administration of these funds, the use of CDBG funds, as well as home and SHIP funds used for affordable housing, is guided by regulation, as I mentioned, and subject to federal, state, and city review, monitoring, and auditing requirements. And those that we give these funds to, provide grants to, are subject to this same level of scrutiny. So it's pretty staff intensive. General fund allocations to the 6 organizations, however, are far less restricted, and that was intentional. The organizations must comply with Housing First, which is a resolution that this board passed in 2016, and must submit quarterly reports to our community development coordinator to ensure that the funds are actually being used for homeless-related services. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, there are numerous other programs and services that other departments also fund. You saw a listing of some of those from CPD and Parks and Recreation, Utility Customer Service. Library also does a host of things. I suspect too, Fire Department probably does quite a bit. And of course, GAS often sponsors many of the fundraising events that a lot of these organizations are having out in the community to raise additional funds. So I'll pause there to have this conversation that I think we're to have, and happy to take any questions. Chuck is here as well to answer any specifics that I may not be able to address.
Any questions for Ms. Sanderson or Mr. Lane?
I don't have questions, but I'm the one who, it's my initiative, I think, that it's on this agenda. So this is something that, I want to advocate for more general funds for some of the social service agencies that work with a continuum of care, with a focus on housing first. So they fall within those parameters. And I typed up some notes on some stats and things that I had Denise look over, and she gave, some of her comments on here.
We'll relay race it.
As well. So I left her edits, which are fine. Some of the questions that are raised are about some numbers, but I will say I serve on the Continuum of Care, which is the overriding county agency that deals with multiple social service providers that, like Ms. Anderson said, are committed to housing first and have a data reporting system called HMIS that they track their results and report back on them. And so I go to those meetings at least every month because I serve on that board, and then I'm also part of their executive board as a secretary, which is just a formality for signing things. But I'm on the Funders Council also, which is a group of, the cities, municipalities that fund these organizations and look at the money that comes in. So, not to go through everything, I want to advocate for more of our general funds. I'd like to ask, so my asking is to go from $250,000 from our general fund to $500,000 to start here. And I know it sounds huge as a doubling, but keep in mind that $250,000 has been stagnant for the last 10 years. And if we look at a comparison between how much we put in as, the second largest city here in Pinellas, we have allocated 0.16% of our $152 million general budget fund, where St. Pete, who puts in close to $2 million a year from their general funds, which sounds like a ginormous amount compared to $250,000, but it's only 0.6% of their general fund dollars. So, there's a little bit of perspective there. And I would say, the asks that I sat through when I attended the Neighborhood Affordable Housing Advisory Board, where we had a number of people come and advocate for those, it's the SHIP funding, correct, that they were?
No, the CDBG.
The CDB, the Community Development Block Grant funding, right.
Correct.
And so they advocated for things, and there must have been, 20 different providers that came and asked for funding.
Yeah.
And most of them got what they asked for, but there's a cap on what they can ask for. And so they have to piecemeal where they're getting their funding from other places as well. And to a person, I would tell you that people that are part of the continuum of care need money for case management. They absolutely do. And, you know, case managers are, I toured Pinellas Hope, I toured Safe Harbor, I toured St. Vincent de Paul. When I was out at Pinellas Hope, you know, they have room for 4 case managers. And this was, I think in February or so I was there. And they had you know, they couldn't fill 2 positions. They start at $33,000 a year. And that's, you know, for a person with a college degree to work with, you know, the residents out there with substance abuse, mental health issues, finding jobs, dealing with transportation and all that. So you know, you can take a minute and look this over. I know we're not voting on anything now. You can ask me questions. I'm not any expert, but, you know, I'll tell you, I've also been a guardian ad litem for the last 4 years, working with children who have been removed from their homes for neglect or abuse. And the number of children that have this most recent case, this little boy is going to turn 2 in June. There have been at least 7 case managers in his short life. 7. And it's because people cycle in and out of a low-paying job. The case management at Safe Harbor, which is run by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, when I did that tour, there's one person assigned to over 300 residents that might be there at one time for substance abuse counseling. And they might have a longer retention at Safe Harbor because they have benefits and a little higher pay. But certainly the impact they're making on those people that need help, you know, it's not what it could be. And the, you know, the other thing I would say is we had an email that came across our email today from, you know, a resident that complains about the homeless and defecation and destruction of property and all that, and, you know, and finding paraphernalia that looks like it's, you know, substance related. And I'd say that goes back to case management and wraparound services in our community. And, you know, we just need more. And the other thing is, as I get going, is, you know, I've talked to, so right now, the person who heads Continuum of Care is Amy Foster, who is term limiting out on St. Pete's City Council. And so she's taken that job for the Continuum of Care. And, you know, she's an expert in this realm. And I'm new, so I've only been going to these meetings for a year or so. But one of the questions I asked at a meeting was, you know, what are the other municipalities doing? Are they contributing, the municipalities in Pinellas? And I think what's the number? Do you guys know it off the top of your head? 20-something?
24 municipalities.
24 municipalities. And like 3 of us generally contribute, you know, Largo, St. Pete, and Clearwater.
And the county.
And the county. And then Seminole and have tiny little amounts maybe. But I said, why aren't these other municipalities contributing? And, you know, some of the the feedback is, well, they don't feel like they have a homeless problem or something. And you know, if we're offering services, of course, people will come here. But, you know, we're a community. This whole county is a community of people whose family members move all around, whether they're, you know, homeless or not. And one of the things, you know, Amy suggested in the realm of the Continuum of Care meeting was, you know, strategically, perhaps you, Mayor Hibbard and Mayor Kreisman and Woody, what's Woody's last name?
Woody
Brown, Mayor Brown of Largo, you know, could make an appeal to other municipalities to contribute even $10,000 a year to help pay for different case management or wraparound services in the county. And she said, you know, that's been approached before. You know, nothing really happened with it, but why not try it again?
Well, some of the beach communities, when you go to, you know, Indian Rocks and Bel Air Beach and Bel Air Shores and Reddingtons and Madeira and all those, they don't have as much. I think on the homeless issue, one of the questions has always been, as we increase services, do we attract more homeless? And this goes way back, right, Mr. Horn? You can jump in here anytime you want, the water's fine. And that is a question that I think has never been answered. I mean, I was on the HEP board for years. They do a marvelous job of ending the homelessness cycle. They have a very long program. Part of it's for veterans, and I know you mentioned that in here. And then families, and then individuals. One of the issues that we get the most about homeless are the hardcore homeless that are very difficult to end the cycle. There's a lot of mental health issues, and a lot of them have no desire really to seek help. They have chosen a lifestyle with little responsibility, and I'm happy to discuss this whole thing. I don't know, does the half, going from $250,000 to $500,000 have a basis, or it's just a doubling? And
Well, I thought about, first of all, it hadn't been changed in 10 years, so I thought, oh my gosh, what do I ask for, or something? But I thought 250 is so tiny. I think a doubling of it in light of how salaries of case management. And I think if, whether or not we earmark it for case management, or however somebody else might be able to determine that, I think when you earmark it for wraparound services and case management, it's not a beacon for people to come to our city. It's not like feeding and shelter here, and this is, it's giving it to organizations that just need one other person. If I can just take 1 minute. So I had reached out to, I think his name is Joshua at HEP, and Christine at St. Vincent de Paul for, just some feedback, like what would you do if you had an extra $50,000 a year or something. But, this is what Christine came back with today. She said, the bottom line is, at the community kitchen, is that we have people, some new, some regulars, come to the kitchen daily eager to find housing. They have called 211, made the calls to the referred nonprofits, and have been added to the list. If they are not veterans or families, they are out of luck. We have been working to forge relationships with housing providers, including hotels. There are opportunities to move people on the streets into housing. We just don't have the staff to make the calls, visit the facilities, and advocate for our clients. With a housing case manager, or 2 or 3, which is what's needed, but one step at a time, we can find the appropriate housing and job placement for our clients on the streets. The work is messy, with issues of addiction and mental health, but we can succeed in housing the large majority of those on the streets with adequate case management. So I do understand that, we don't want to be seen as a sole provider, but I think if we help our providers out there who are already doing the job but are just, struggling like you wouldn't believe. They just are. Every one of them.
Mayor, can I?
Yes.
Can I weigh in? So I want to start at the beginning to create the context for what we have been doing for the last 10 years. There is no mandate for the city to spend social services dollars. Okay, and I did not feel that I had that mandate as the manager. And so that's why I brought to the council a way of addressing the most critical homeless issue that we're facing that no one wants to help us with. And that's the chronic homeless person on the street. So we do contribute. That's why that 250 stayed the way it was. 100,000 of that goes to the sheriff and Safe Harbor. So, so it was really focused around who will really address our problem. Because if we encounter someone on the street who wants to get off the street, we do contribute to HEP and some of the other services who are willing to take them if they follow their rules. So we are doing some of that, but we're also are trying to deal with the person that you all get most of the complaints about, the person, the homeless person that's doing all these nasty things, in their area. So, if you want to spend more general fund dollars to fund social services, which is a county function, we contribute our county dollars to our tax dollars to the county to fund that, then that's fine, but that's something the council will have to own, because you all really are the ones that give us the capability to spend general fund dollars. So it seems to me that that's kind of where the conversation, I think, kind of needs to focus around. If we're giving more money to social service agencies that are already getting funding from the county and other sources, then we just need to know that we're just, we're adding to their revenue generation, which is fine, but we're using general fund dollars to do that.
Which is where I was gonna go. I mean, this really should be a part of the strategic planning process, because what we're thinking about doing is somewhat of a departure. I mean, we have been funding some, but we've had the discussion about whether we're getting out of our lane back 10 years ago. But it was a severe issue with the homeless. It still is a problem. But we do have different lanes. We haven't talked about that too much, but of local government versus county government versus state and federal. It is a departure from our lane. And the discussion I would want to have is, if we increase it, A, we're going to be spending less somewhere else, or in the general fund, or we're going to increase the millage rate. It's a zero-sum game. So, if you spend more on Project A or Cause A, you're going to spend less on B, C, D, E, and F. That's perfectly fine. We make policy decisions all the time. But I still think it's something that really falls into what we're trying to do, with USF, and decide whether that is what the community wants. And so why not have that in the strategic plan and get feedback from our citizens if they want general fund dollars to be diverted from what they're traditionally used for and into social services. And then if so, where are we getting the greatest bang for our buck?
May I add a couple of thoughts?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilmember Beckman and I spoke of this with Chuck as well last week, and certainly I agree, case management is sorely lacking in the county. One of the challenges or concerns that I would have in utilizing general fund dollars for a targeted use such as case management is we then do run into, or I would recommend rather, establishing some regulations in which we're vetting organizations to evaluate that ROI. I think we certainly would owe it to the citizens if we're targeting those funds for a specific use, that we have a process to ensure that in fact we're getting results from that and selecting organizations that are most effective at delivering case management. So it would not be, in my view, as easy as what we currently have, which is a stated letter from those 6 organizations that we fund. It would be a little bit deeper. Obviously, we're experts at that with CDBG and others, so we have the infrastructure in place, but it does add some staff management, some time on the books, if you will, to be able to implement that. I would also like to remind you that we have received some American Rescue Plan funds separate from what the city received, the $11 million. That $1.6 million does have an opportunity to support homeless-related services that are directly related to a COVID impact. And we could utilize those funds in the near term for that kind of expense if council chose to do so. We have not yet strategized how we might wish to expend those dollars. We have talked internally that we also recognize there is a severe shortage for family shelters in the community as well. And so that is something that we would probably like to explore, is leveraging those dollars to address short-term needs. And that's another thing I think that I would like to look at, short-term needs for family shelters. Not building new family shelters necessarily, but working with an organization that looks to acquire a property that is term limited in terms of its use as a family shelter is sort of what we've been talking about internally. And then, of course, there's the $22 million, half of which we've already received, that's got a broad array of funding possibilities within that scope that could include this kind of expenditure as well. And as Jay shared with you earlier, we have not, as a staff, sat down and talked, strategized, or prioritized any of those funds. And so I'm certainly not prepared to suggest that we use those. I'm just saying that, there is an opportunity within that funding source to consider certain homeless-related or homeless prevention-related activities that could include funding for case management, I imagine. So.
But if we do that, this is a tranche of money that is a one-time deal.
Correct. The $1.6 million that I mentioned, we have to expend it by 2030. We have to plan for it by 2025 and expend it by 2030, which quite honestly, we could probably expend it within 2 years. But it is just $1.6 million, which I know sounds like a lot, but in our world, it really is not. And then the larger dollar amount, as Jay mentioned, has a shorter time frame, ironically, in which it needs to be expended. So.
Mr. Christ, I'm going to draw you into this, seeing as you stuck around, you asked for it. How would you, if we wanted to put this as an item within the strategic planning process and put it out to citizens to get their input, how do you put something like this in context?
So I think there is a couple of ways. The first is when we do the survey, and we're going to be doing a SWOT within the survey to residents. And so it is one of the drop-down items that can be included is support for social services. That can be included as part of the resident survey to get feedback. So that would be the first way. I think that, and I may be misspeaking, so I don't know what has been done, but the first thing that went to my head when you think about strategic planning around this is if you are out of your lane, is there a way to do some type of pilot program bringing in the county? And that's all part of the strategic plan. So it may be that it's it's a goal to eventually have some type of program, and we would work through that within the confines of working with the departments and leadership. But to first start out would be in the resident survey, to ask them if there is support basically for social services. Funded by the city, obviously.
Right. Okay.
Just to be clear, I don't want the city to be organizing anything. I don't think we need to run it. It's to send it out there to support people that are already on the ground doing the work and have trouble filling positions because they can't pay, people to do this work, or, there aren't enough people. And to talk about it during our strategic planning, absolutely, but we've already made the decision that we're putting money into this from general funds. We've just decided it's $250,000 for the last 10 years. I am just saying we need to up it. Just look at the cost of living simply, let alone anything else. And $250,000, I think, I figured it out here as, 0.01%. So an idea that, it's going to have to come from something else or whatever, I mean, it's minuscule in our whole budget. It is minuscule. And I think looking at it as a symbolic, kind of just a commitment to the work that people are doing out there for people throughout our county, and symbolically saying, this we need to do more, and then to back it up in getting out of our lane, and whether we're in our lane or not, but putting pressure on the county, putting pressure on the state, that, correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, they cut our Sadowski funding by 2/3, correct?
Yes
They
and
raided
no.
that fund?
Yes and no. So last year, they swept it completely, and the legislation this year prohibits them from making those sweeps in the future.
After they cut 2/3. So now we get to hold on to our minuscule third.
Well-
And they promise they're not going to cut it, is that right?
Well, it's in legislation now that they cannot. So, if I may, I'll just share with you what we're expecting. Bear with me a moment. Yeah. So thank you, Chuck. We're anticipating SHIP for our next fiscal year at $779,230. Over the last 5 years, including the $0 from last year, so from fiscal year 17 through 21, the average was $304,000. Now, keep in mind, one of those was a zero. But the highest amount was in 2017 when it was $722,638. So it's restoring it back to that level. Now, of course, dock stamps drives that. So hot real estate market, I suspect that this is probably where we're going to land, near height of where we're going to land going forward. I'm anticipating that the real estate market's going to have some sort of correction at some point. But it is certainly more than what we have seen over the last several years. And I think from our perspective, the real benefit there is that it is more predictable going forward. So as we're considering staff planning for future years, what have you, we have an idea of actually where those dollars may come from. Importantly, we've also seen a 44% increases in over that same fiscal year 17 through 21 on the federal side. We have seen a 44% increase over that 5-year period. So it's been incremental year over year, but it has gone up. So,
Those are some restricted funds, right? Where,
well, they're all restricted, but yeah, yes.
Mr. Horn?
Well, just one last comment. Back to the earlier conversation about the $250,000, I would say that as policymakers, you're in that position to determine, how you want or how you would envision that general fund dollars ought to be spent. When I arrived at the $250,000, it was really related to how we could help some of those providers. But I didn't call up St. Pete and say, what are you doing? I didn't call up Tampa. Those cities certainly have been using general fund dollars, and I'm sure they made a policy decision to do that. I got the policy support from the council 10 years ago for the $250, and that's where we have been. So, it may be pittance today. If you want to take it to another level, then that's what you should do as as policymakers. But I don't have any reservations about what we've done in the past, because, like I said, there's been no policy mandate, to add to that number. You all can add to that number.
and certainly it's not focused at you. It's more of, if there hasn't been an ask, then there wasn't an ask, and it wasn't allocated higher than 250. But I'm asking now, I'm asking now. And along with that, I'm asking for our mayor to perhaps think about making a concerted effort with the other mayors to ask other municipalities to, pitch in, to put some pressure on the county. Whatever we can do to get more funding for the people who are out there working with our most vulnerable.
Well, I will talk to other mayors.
Okay.
When I come in contact with them. I would also, this is something you're passionate about, I would encourage you to talk to some of the county commissioners.
I can do that. I'll do that.
Because, again, if, I haven't looked lately, but it used to be, and I think it still is, 26% of everyone's tax dollars go to the county. 24 comes to the city, 38 goes to the school board, and then the balance goes to Swift Mud, PSTA,
JWB.
you know, JWB, and some other organizations. But more tax dollars for Clearwater residents go to the county than comes to the city. You know, and that's why I sometimes don't want to get too far out of my lane. I'll give you another example. We serve a lot of the county residents with Parks and Recreation. And we had a very difficult decision at one point. I don't know if you were here, I think you might have been.
I was.
When we looked at, you know, the fee that we charged non-Clearwater residents. And, you know, it goes back to the kids, which, you know, that's always a tough thing. You know, you get an 8-year-old out here that's in the county that wants to participate in Clearwater, but, you know, the fee to do that is higher if you're a county resident. It's very hard to tell Junior that they can't participate. And at the same time, it's also hard to tell all the Clearwater residents that they need to subsidize somebody who doesn't live in the city. That's not fair to our citizens either. At least we're providing these great facilities for everybody to participate. So these are the, you know, the policy decisions that I don't think are as cut and dry as everyone thinks. And I think are worthy of a discussion, and also worthy of allowing, especially right now, when our citizens are going to have an opportunity to weigh in on things, to see if that's the direction they desire their tax money to go. If it is, I'll institute it. But in the meantime, I'll talk to the other mayors.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else on this topic? Thank you, Ms. Sanderson. Appreciate it. Anything else, Mr. Horn?
No, Mayor.
Ms. Aiken?
No, sir.
You've been so quiet today. Thank you for
She's being illustrious.
Thank you for
being
not
here.
talking.
Yes, no, we love your input. Anything else from the council?
Just on this last item, I do think compassion is important. And obviously, the city believes it is because we put the $250,000 into it. So it's just a level of compassion we want to show. And I agree with the Councilmember Beckman that perhaps there should be an increase.
Well, I would also have everybody ponder, you know, where we would want those monies to go.
I agree.
I do agree with Ms. Sanderson's comments, that you want to look at ROI. And I also would direct them more towards organizations within Clearwater, potentially, that we know are helping Clearwater residents or Clearwater inhabitants. So that's for a future discussion. With that, good session, appreciate it, and all the staff and their input, and we are adjourned.